just want to kind of kick things off with, first of all, your background. I always say when I interview somebody that, franchising found them. I had heard that, and it works. And I'm curious, did you set out when you went to law school, like, I'm going to be a franchise attorney?
No, absolutely not. Franchising found me.
Okay. How did it find you?
I worked for a small law firm in Manhattan, two guys, and they had one client that was a franchise company. Now, I was out of law school 2 years, so the only thing I knew about franchising was going into a restaurant and eating in McDonald's or Burger King.
Right.
So he said, look, I need you to learn about franchising because I'm too busy. I do other things. So I need you to learn about it. Now, in 1977, you didn't have Google. I couldn't Google franchising and get all the information I needed. So I actually had to read a book. I had to read a bunch of books. So I read a bunch of books. I went to a bunch of IFA, and I didn't know what IFA meant until I got there, seminars. And I really liked it. And I tell you, I liked it because it was more business than it was legal. And I had a penchant for business rather than being just a lawyer. Because in the two years I was out of law school, I did trust and estates. It was boring. I hated it.
Right.
So I get to this and I find out, oh, franchising, wow, look at this. And I just took to it. In 4 years, I learned what I needed to learn. I went out on my own in 1981. It was great.
Wow. And franchising has changed a whole lot since 1981, right?
Oh, you bet it has.
It always comes down to franchise unit economics, right? That hasn't changed. So the fundamentals of being successful in franchising still the same. However, the tools and resources and laws and everything regulation has dramatically changed over the 46 years, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? Social media has played a tremendous role in franchising, particularly in franchise sales. Because back in the day, and you remember, it was the Wall Street Journal or the Sunday Times or a trade show, and that was it.
Right.
They don't exist. Trade shows are dying. Nobody uses print media. Everything is social. It's social media has revolutionized franchise marketing.
Yes. Back in the 90s, I used to pick up Entrepreneur magazine, and I used to go to the back of the magazine quickly to see what franchise opportunities were there because I wanted to be first, and there was nobody who had done sports at that time. And I'd go there every month. I'd go flipping back on those pages, but that's where you look for franchise opportunities. You go to Entrepreneur magazine.
That's right.
There was many years ago, I was at one of the franchise conferences, and it was like the dawn of social media. You're mentioning this, and the topic was, is social media here to stay or is it a fad? Do you remember that?
I remember.
Yeah. And it was actually like a legit conversation in the franchise conference. It was like, should you even bother with this thing called Facebook and LinkedIn?
Right. And now TikTok and Instagram and all that other stuff.
Right. And it created a spirited debate back then because people really questioned whether this social media thing was really going to last, or was it kind of like the .coms that blew up in the early 2000s. How does social media play, since you mentioned this, I'm curious on how does social media play a challenging role for you as a franchise attorney? Is it because it's used in a way where it could violate the item 19 and stuff like that?
It's really kind of uncontrollable.
Right.
Because you can't tell a client you're not registered in a particular state, so you got to stay out of that state. Because social media has no boundaries.
Right.
There are no state lines. So you go out on Facebook, it's in the world, okay, not just in one state. So the client has to be really careful that it's not going to filter into one of the state registrations and you're going to violate the state law by having advertising in that state. And item 19, they got to be careful what they say on social media because it's not something you can hide. It's out there.
Right. Well, let's take this back. I want to start more from early on. So our audience is a mix of founders of emerging brands. They have a few units, probably less than 50 units for sure. I also have other founders that are excited they listen to the show because they want to franchise their concept. So I want to start there with the founders they're starting out. So when you get somebody who calls you up and says, Harold, I want to franchise my company. I need an FDD, or they don't even know they need an FDD, right?
They don't even know what that is.
Okay. So why don't you share, you get a founder that says, Harold, I want to franchise my business. What do I need to do? What do you tell them?
Well, we have a very robust SEO firm, and I probably get 4 or 5 of those leads a week.
Wow.
And some of them, and again, here's the social media, the internet. Some of them know exactly what an FDD is, and they know what the basics are because they've done some research. Others haven't got a clue. So basically on the call, I have to explain to them, franchising is a way of growing your business, obviously, but it's a very regulated business. It's an industry that's regulated by the federal government and by 15 different states. So you have to have certain documents, because some of them, they're already telling me, oh, I sold 5 licenses. I said, oh, really? So tell me what exactly you did. Oh, yeah, I charged them a fee. I let them use my name and I trained them. Well, guess what? That's a franchise, no matter what you call it.
Right.
So at the end of the day, they don't even know they're franchised and they've already sold 3 units. So I have to sit down and what I recommend, and I'm not plugging my book. I wrote a book a bunch of years ago, how to franchise your business. So I tell them, why don't you go on Amazon and buy my book, and you can see exactly what to do so you don't screw up and sell illegally, particularly if you sell in a registration state, then you really have a problem.
Right.
So the call goes, here's what you need and here's what it costs. And you hear silence because they don't realize that it does cost money to do this.
Sure.
They can just magically snap your fingers and, oh, I'm a franchise.
Right.
Well, no, guess what? It does cost money. And it can cost anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 to get into the game.
Right. And that's just to open your doors.
Right. That's before marketing.
Right. Which is going to take a lot more money than we all think when we start out. I speak firsthand experience there. So just for the folks that are listening, an FDD is a franchise disclosure document. It's the offering circular. It's the legal document you need to have done before you franchise your concept. And you can obviously, after you have an FDD, you can be in non-registration states. And as we know, you mentioned there's about a dozen or so states where you actually have to file for their approval in those states to do business. But let's talk about the people that are inadvertently franchising. What is the criteria that defines somebody that is a franchise?
Well, the definition, except in New York, is pretty simple. If you charge a fee, you allow them to use your intellectual property, your name, and you provide services like you train them, you sell them product, or you give them a territory. That's a franchise. New York is a little unique. Their franchise law is different. You only need 2, a fee and the intellectual property. And that gets a lot of people in trouble because, there are lawyers out there who think, oh, you can do a license agreement and not have the third prong of the definition, and you're okay. In 35 states, you might be. In New York, you wouldn't be. So there are many companies that come into New York and illegally sell a franchise because they don't realize that you only need a fee and the name. They're a franchise.
Do some people prefer to license over franchising as a way of thinking that they can avoid further regulation?
I sit down on the phone with these people and I explain to them, I said, look, you want to make money. Okay, you want to take the upfront fee, you want them to use your name. But if you're not going to train them, if you're not going to teach them how to run the business, they're going to ruin your brand. Right. So you're going to have to train them. Ergo, they're a franchise. So take the notion of a license and throw it out the window because it doesn't exist.
No, you're right. So there are quite a number of people who have inadvertently franchised, right? There's about 4,000 franchisors, right, that are out there?
Yeah, I think it's up to almost 5 now, from the last count I saw.
Do you have any idea how many are illegally franchising above that number?
Probably a lot, because a lot of them try to cut corners. They don't go to the right lawyer. They do things that they shouldn't do. They don't do their research, and they want to save money. Look, in my book, one of the 3 ways for a person who wants a franchise to fail is if they're undercapitalized. And if you don't have enough money to do the legal work, you shouldn't even think about franchising. You're not ready yet.
Right.
So they want to say, you know what, I don't need a lawyer. Let me do it this way. And they try to cut corners and they do it illegally. And then it gets them into more trouble.
Of course. And the other thing I would recommend, just as somebody that has gone through this before, is you never hire an attorney that says, I can do franchising, versus somebody who's a franchise attorney. It's like saying, I can play shortstop versus I am a shortstop. Those are 2 very distinct differences.
Well, we call those people dabblers, and they don't know what they're doing. They've maybe done some franchisee work, okay, which is totally different.
Right.
Have no idea what they're doing, but they're not smart enough to say, look, go to an expert. And that's what gets people in trouble.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.